Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. Palestine was at the top of the world's agenda at the UN this week. But does anyone have a real plan that would end the bloodshed in Gaza? Let's get to the bottom line. After years of being swept under the rug, the issue of Palestine and ending Israel's war in Gaza were at the very top of the list at the annual meeting of the UN General Assembly. In quick succession, 2 UN Security Council members, France and the United Kingdom, recognized the State of Palestine, along with Canada, Australia, Spain, and other European countries. But the question remains, what is all this recognition going to do for the Palestinian people? In Gaza, the UN says Israel has committed genocide against the Palestinian people. Let me tell you what that means. It means Israel has, quote, deliberately inflicted conditions calculated to destroy them, including preventing births. And in the West Bank, Israeli leaders are vowing to build more homes, to take more land, and find new ways to squeeze and pressure the millions of Palestinians there. So what does this push for Palestine statehood mean now? Today we're talking with Pascal Confavreux, the new spokesperson for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Pascal, thank you so much for joining us. So let me ask, why is France recognizing Palestine now?
Thank you, Steve. I think it was indeed something very historic that we witnessed at the beginning of the United Nations General Assembly last Monday. France recognized officially the State of Palestine, and it's the outcome of 8, 9, 10 months of a long diplomatic work made by France, but also with the Saudi Arabia authorities. And it created first a dynamic of 10 countries going on this path of recognition of the Palestinian state. You named them. But what did France? It put the card of the recognition on the table to see also what we could obtain in order to have some very concrete steps. And what did we do? First, it was a condemnation of Hamas, a very strong, very explicit condemnation of Hamas, and that was adopted at the United Nations level. It was the first time. And to have Hamas completely out of any further Palestinian state. Second, we had also some very concrete steps made by the Palestinian Authority for its governance, for the end of the pay-for-slay for the pay-for-slay scheme, or for the renovation of their education system. And third, we had also some very concrete steps in terms of the day after. The day after in terms of security, the day after in terms of reconstruction, and the day after in terms of regional organization. And so it's all that was encapsulated on Monday, and that's all that was adopted by 142 countries. And we are very proud, I must say, to have taken this two-state solution out of the mortal danger it was 1 year ago.
So just recently, we had on this show Rob Malley. Rob Malley was a lead negotiator in the Middle East. He worked for President Clinton. He worked for President Obama, worked for President Biden. And he basically lays out from his perspective that the two-state solution has long been an illusion, that there may have been moments we got close, but the United States, whenever we had a real chance to get the United States deliver on this, the U.S. veered a different direction, and it's been an illusion. So I just think there's an interesting tension between the long history of negotiations around a two-state solution, and then many of the people that were for it in the past are now basically saying that's the wrong way. Tell us how President Macron in France is looking at this moment of how you make real, going into the steps you just talked about, perhaps in more detail, how do you make real a two-state prospect that's not just an ongoing chapter in a long, disappointing history on the two-state solution?
The danger was that the two-state solution was going to slowly be not feasible anymore. That was really the risk. And the second risk was that we were going into a kind of endless cycle of violence. And so that's why we had to take very concrete things. For the first time, the Palestinian Authority is taking very, very concrete steps. And why is it important? Because it devitalizes in the other parties, the ones who are saying, "Oh, look, it is not a good interlocutor anymore." For the first time, also. Countries such as Qatar, such as Turkey, but also other countries of the region are condemning the massacre of October 7th, are condemning at the United Nations level Hamas, and are saying very blatantly that Hamas has no future in the future Palestinian Authority. It gives a very important step for the security of Israel. And this is what is important here, is to give some political horizon for the populations who are not willing to join violence to say, okay, there is another solution, this is what we can do. Of course, the absolute priority is the ceasefire in Gaza, the release of the 48 hostages that are still in the hands of the Hamas, and the access for humanitarian aid. But what we think is that this conference really helps that, because what? The ceasefire always has a problem to be materialized, because no one knows what we do for the day after. And so by giving a scheme of, okay, here is what could look like the day after, stabilization force, reconstruction with the Arab plan adopted in March 2025, and regional integration, it will help the negotiation for ceasefire to go through.
You know, if you're a resident of Gaza and you see the bombs falling, you've seen your, community centers blown apart, your businesses blown apart, I think part of what's very interesting listening to you is the part about reconstruction. And I've had the UN official on about the human right for homes and infrastructure, saying this is not just a 10-year project, not a 20-year project. This is a lifetime of rebuilding in this area, which requires some trust that you're not going to keep blowing up things. But I'm just asking you, if you're a human being on the other side of this, on the ground in Gaza, should you be hopeful for this moment, or should you be demanding more?
The situation, let's be honest, in Gaza is totally awful. We have said it multiple times. The United Nations have said recognized there's a state of famine in Gaza, and we have condemned the military operation by Israel, saying that there is no really military means in Gaza, because you can kill persons, but you cannot kill an ideology. And President Macron on CBS last Sunday said basically there were 25,000 Hamas fighters at the beginning of October 2023. Half of them have been killed by the Israeli army, but estimations say that new soldiers or new fighters, have come back there. So it shows that the military logic is not working and cannot work. So yes, it can be very hopeful for the population there, because it is a step further towards the self-determination of the people, and it's why this is what we need to help them for this support.
I'm very interested in the fact that you have a government right now in Israel that seems to be thriving. I mean, let me read you something that is part of this story, which we haven't gone into, is that an Israeli finance minister is quoted as saying that there'll be a potential real estate bonanza if you were to move people off. So if your objective in Israel is actually not solving the security issue by coming to terms with a new arrangement, a new order, new governance, but your goal is actually to remove people, to depopulate this, and to have a real estate bonanza, should the world be worried about the fact that the parties in this are operating from very, very different contexts?
We also hear the fatigue, the sadness of the Israeli population, and I think you can see it yourself. And we think that it's also a sign for them to show that there are countries around Israel that are really ready to go further in terms of recognition of the need to go into a regional integration and recognition of the security of Israel, living into borders that are secure. You can build the highest walls you want. If your neighbor wants to hit you, you can never completely block that from the risk of happening. And so this is this logic that we have to stop.
President Trump, Pascal, has said he wants to end this war. He said it in his UN General Assembly speech, but he also said this, and I'd like to play it for you.
Unfortunately, Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace. We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities.
What did President Macron say to President Trump in response?
First, we did not forget at all October 7th. France felt in its heart October 7th, just as the world conscience. 51 French citizens were killed during October 7th. So we totally not forget that. But what we propose here is a complete failure for Hamas. Very concrete. Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution. Hamas wants to destroy Israel. Hamas wants a Palestine from the river to the sea. And Hamas is fueled by anger and by the violence always. And so by blocking this cycle of violence, we go exactly against what Hamas wants.
What's the big driver, if I may ask, for what the president of France has done? Is it domestic politics, or is it really looking at the international scene?
I think it's really looking at the international scene. We really don't want to have the Israel-Palestine conflict going into inner politics. You describe what's happening in the US. It's happening in all democracies to have people who don't agree. But what I would like to stress here is that this scheme, once again adopted by a very large minority, 142 states, with new parts of the puzzle, is first, we think, helping the efforts of ceasefire, and these efforts by the Americans, by the Egyptians, by the Qataris, and that we completely support of mediation. But it's also, should the American administration want to deepen or go into a second step of Abraham Accords, it also helps such a logic, because what are the Abraham Accords? It's to have some Arab countries giving something to Israel, the recognition, the bilateral ties, in exchange of having from the Americans or from others some reassurances with economic, political, and so on. But here it's the same. Here it's the same. We were giving new cards by 10 countries of recognition of Palestine, and some states made historic new steps in terms of condemnation of Hamas and the things of the day after. So should the American administration go into this logic, which were in the first Trump administration, it is completely coherent.
Pascal, I'm just interested in what other steps are that may be necessary. So what if Israel continues to move to annex parts of the West Bank or the West Bank itself? What if the decimation and attack and really the horror story, not against Hamas, but against Palestinian people, continues? I think one of the interesting things we're all going to be watching for the countries that just recognized Palestine is, are some of those countries send arms to Israel? Are they going to potentially sanction Israel? Are they willing to put other parts of their leverage on the line to sort of help Israel or to get Israel to change course? And so do you anticipate that France is willing to put some muscle behind what it just did in the United Nations?
The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, proposed a few days ago some elements in the State of the Union. There is an American State of the Union speech, but there is also a European State of the Union speech. And during this speech, she proposed two things: some individual sanctions for settlers or for members of the Israeli government, and to have some commercial leverage with what we call the EU-Israel Agreement of Association. in this agreement, there is Article 2 that say we share common values, and on this leverage, we can have some commercial leverage here. And she's working on that. To have that, you need a majority in the European Union member states. And France has said that they were in favor of moving towards this. So that's where we are on this.
You know, the United Nations has come out and voted and basically said that Israel's actions in Gaza are a genocide. And I want to read this. It's very technical. It says, genocide is causing serious bodily and mental harm and deliberately inflicting conditions calculated to destroy the Palestinian people in Gaza, including preventing births. From France's perspective, has that line over whether this is genocide or not, which we spent a lot of time talking about, almost legalistically, has that line been crossed?
You're totally right. There is a very clear legal definition of what a genocide is. And that's why we don't take part in that. It's for the courts to say. There is the International Jurisdiction Court, which is linked to the United Nations, and there is the Penal Court, which is in La Haye, which is also to deal with. They will say what has to be, legally speaking, taken into account.
Well, another leader that President Macron has developed a close relationship is Mohammed bin Salman, the leader, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And there is a French-Saudi proposal, as you discussed, to think about these day-after questions, to begin looking at governance, looking at how you interact with the various players and create a day after. The U.S. has also been working behind the scenes with Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, with a Blair Initiative. What's interesting about both of these proposals, neither of them, to be honest, involve depopulating Gaza, despite what you may hear from Israeli government leaders. Neither of them are necessarily turning over anything or including Hamas in the future. So there are a lot of similarities, but I'd be interested to the degree that you followed the Blair Initiative. Are there major differences between what you're doing with the Saudis and have put on the table for those to support and what former Prime Minister Blair has put together?
So first, it was very important to work hand in hand with the Saudis on this, and the collaboration with them during these last 8, 9, 10 months was very, very solid and productive, as you can see. The text that was adopted, because sometimes it's not very well known, but the text was adopted on July 29th. We call it the Declaration of New York. We think it's a landmark text, and it was really done hand in hand with the Saudi authorities on that. And then we see, indeed, in the American side, that on the Gaza prospect, Tony Blair is involved, and also Jared Kushner is involved in this. Seems to be involved in this plan. So far, we are. I leave it to the Americans to say what's in this plan. That's for sure. But we can see that they are attached to the legacy also of the first Trump administration of this Abraham Accord, and I think it will count for the future.
Do you think the pathway of what you're trying to negotiate with the Saudis and coming forward is going to transform what I kind of see sitting on the sideline behavior by many other Arab governments about what is really happening on the ground to the Palestinian people?
Many local countries, regional countries, took part into this initiative. I told you that at the beginning. For instance, there was like this condemnation of Hamas. It was done by these countries of the region, and it hadn't been done in the United Nations text before. So they are part. They are part of this, and we discuss with them extensively. For instance, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot, yesterday had a long meeting with the Gulf Cooperation Council, which was discussing a lot of this subject too.
You know, the government of the UAE has communicated to Israel that if it were to proceed with annexation of the West Bank, it would destroy their role in the Abraham Accords. If Israel were to move forward like that, would your government consider sanctions against Israel, strong sanctions against Israel?
Once again, for the sanctions, we are talking with the with our European partners. We take into account different parts that we think the Israelis should move, such as the evolving of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, such as also the stop of the E1 colony, or such as the money transfers, the cash transfers to the Palestinian Authority. There are still 2 billion that are not that have not been sent. But what we also see is that it is very meaningful that such countries that were in the Abraham Accords are saying this could be a red line for them.
Let me ask you something that's off this subject, and I want to thank you, Pascal, for your candor. Ukraine, what happens with Ukraine, and also President Macron's, I think, unique role in continuing to keep a focus of Donald Trump on this issue with issues. So President Trump meets President Zelensky, and a remarkable thing happened. He came out and says, I think Ukraine can beat Russia. The complete body language shift, the language itself shift of President Trump about Ukraine's prospects is remarkable. We'll have to see how long that lasts. But I want to ask you, how is your team hearing this news from President Trump? Does it change the game at all from your perspective about the prospects for American and European coordination, and particularly French-American coordination around our approach to Ukraine and its future?
We greet it very positively, but we're not that surprised. It has been weeks and weeks and weeks that we see that Putin is not delivering what he says to President Trump. He was saying that he was ready to meet with President Zelensky. That did not happen. And we see on the ground that he's sending drones and missiles on in Ukraine and so on. So President Trump sees that. And it's very clear that President Putin is on the field. He's not for the peace. He's continuing the war. And what President Trump wants is a peace. And President Zelensky has said since March that he was ready for an unconditional ceasefire, very concretely. So I think this is what's happening. These lies are materializing more and more, and this is what maybe can explain this statement yesterday by President Trump.
French Foreign Ministry spokesperson Pascal Confavreux, thank you so much for joining us today. So what's the bottom line? Last week, my guest, a longtime negotiator for the United States, argued that the two-state solution has long been a fake promise, an illusion, at times even a delusion. But today, here we are. France, Canada, Australia, the UK, and other Western countries have joined the majority of countries in the world that already recognize the right of the Palestinian people to their own state. There are 157 countries now out of 193 that recognize Palestine. Understandably, Palestinians aren't rejoicing as Israel drops bombs on them and innocent people are dying and the land they farm and live on is shrinking. This isn't an automatic solution to the war. But here are 4 things to think about. First, recognition of Palestine is growing, not shrinking. Second, it creates a wedge between the U.S. and many of its closest allies. And let me tell you, big divisions between the great Western powers are uncomfortable for them. Third, this creates its own momentum, a long-term pressure on Israel. And fourth, it's pushing Arab and Muslim governments to take up more of a role in Palestine after decades of being frozen out by American-led peace processes. So it's not an end, but perhaps it's an important new beginning. And that's the bottom line.